Well, good morning and welcome to Sound Off. This is the one KSRM, now 9:10, 54 degrees outside here on KB Road. Jake Thompson in with you this morning. My number 283-5811. That's 283-5811. And you're going to want to remember that number because we have on a special guest today running for the House of Representatives, Congressman, soon to be Congressman, running for to replace our one and only Congressman, Forrest Dunbar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, right off the bat, I'm going to ask, what's with the goofy name?
So my parents moved to Alaska in the late 70s to go to UAF, and they were both sort of not hippies exactly, but kind of that movement, I think, a little bit. They were a little bit too young to be hippies, really, and this was their compromise name. I think my dad actually wanted to name me Quincy at first, and so they settled on Forrest for some reason. So.
And then I assume that the Tom Hanks film came out and your life was ruined.
Exactly. I think that was around junior high or a little bit before junior high, and it was unpleasant for a little while, but we've reclaimed it.
I was going to say you've now taken on the Run Forrest Run.
Well, we knew people were going to yell that at me, and that was going to be said, so we felt we might as well sort of turn it into a positive.
All right. Well, so you're running on the Democrat ticket.
Yeah.
You have some competition here in the primary.
Yes.
Sort of token competition, if you will.
Well, I just want to say first and foremost, I consider myself an Alaskan first and foremost. And that sort of is how I identify.
Every Democrat says that.
Well, there you go. But yeah, we do have a primary opponent, Frank von der Sar from down the road in Homer. And I met him. It was funny. We had an event down there, and he came up to me and he said, "I'm going to vote for you in the general." And I said, "Thank you." He's a nice guy, but we are going to win the primary.
Excellent. So with that, tell us a bit about yourself. Why are you running for Congress?
Sure. We'll just start where I'm from. I was raised in a town called Eagle on the Yukon until I was 7, and then we moved to Cordova on Prince William Sound, and that's where my parents still live. My mom was a special ed teacher, is now a librarian. My dad worked for Fish and Game. And I think from a pretty young age, I was pretty engaged. We watched the news together as a family and that kind of thing. And
not a lot to do in Cordova or in Eagle.
Well, we're a quaint drinking town with a fishing problem, as we say in Cordova. But I had the opportunity to work as a commercial fisherman and wildland firefighter. But I also had the chance to go to Washington, D.C. And I first interned for Frank Murkowski. And then I ended up working in college, first as an intern, then as a paid staffer for Congresswoman Madeline Bordalio, who's a Democrat from Guam. And a very interesting experience. And through that, I started to follow federal policy a little more. And today, as I came back to Alaska, and I now serve in the Alaska Army National Guard, just sort of 1 week in a month, but I still follow federal policy pretty closely. And I think it's undeniable today, and this is not a Democrat or Republican position, when I speak to Alaskans all over the state, they say Congress is terrible. And also that we need more effective representation, that our current congressman isn't getting the job done, and we aren't seeing things change in D.C. like we want to. And that is what inspired me to run. I know Alaska needs more effective and ethical representation in Washington, D.C.
I think, there's a lot of people that, they're looking at this particular race. Yesterday on the show was John Cox running against Don Young in the primary. So I'm just going to assume, for the sake of the argument, that Don Young's probably going to win the primary.
Well, we're certainly pulling for John Cox, and we saw he actually just had a sign bloom recently in Anchorage, and his signs are up in Anchorage. So, I've met John a couple of times now through this course of his campaign, because we'll show up to a debate. Of course, Don Young won't. But we'll be there, and a couple other people will be there too. And so I've gotten to know him, and he's been very nice and polite to me.
Yeah, that was one thing I noticed about him. He was an incredibly nice guy.
Well, he's prior service. I think that matters a lot, and I respect that a lot.
And so with that, I mean, obviously we're looking at his analogy was with Don Young that, it's our quarterback's injured, might be time to trade him or to bench him. What is your kind of, I hate to say like attack on Don Young, but what's your view of Don Young at this particular moment? The reason why you're running against?
Sure. So I'll start by saying that I I met Don Young a number of times when I was living in Washington, D.C. and working there, and he was always perfectly nice to me. I have no personal animosity towards him. But because of ethics violations in 2008, so there was a time when he was a powerful and effective representative for the state, and he did really great things, working hand in hand with Ted Stevens, Frank Murkowski, later Lisa. And he was the chair of the Natural Resources Committee and the Transportation Committee. And at the height of his power, he passed 26 bills a year out of the House of Representatives. Last term, he passed 4 or 5, down, which was equivalent to what he was passing his freshman year. And the reason is because in 2008, after his ethics violations, he was stripped of his power to chair full committees. He lost that power. He'll never get it back. And now he's isolated within his own party. And we see he had, continuing again this summer, he had another round of ethics violations that came out. His party is not willing anymore to put him in positions of leadership or to have him chair committees. So he was effective and powerful once. He's no longer effective or influential anymore, and he never will be again.
So you're in the same boat, I would assume, especially because you're running that. It's time for us to just put Don Young to the side. I mean, I'm sure he's still a great resource, but he doesn't need to be representing our only representative in Congress.
Well, it's important because we only have one, that person is a person with clout and with influence. And we'd be starting, as a freshman, you'd be starting with the same amount of influence he has right now, although he's burned a lot of bridges through his kind of personal style, because that was always predicated on the fact that he was powerful. And so people respected him even if he kind of belittled them or berated them. But now he doesn't have that power anymore. So when we see him belittle a congresswoman from Maryland on TV, or yell at a secretary of the Interior, even if it's a secretary that we are upset with, they know that he is speaking loudly and carrying a small stick. And because of that, it's unique, it's counterproductive for our state. So we need somebody that's on that positive trajectory that can be accumulating that influence again, and again can be effective for the state.
Good stuff. We're having a conversation with candidate for United States House of Representatives, Forrest Dunbar, running on the Democrat ticket. We're going to take a tiny break. Our number 283-5811. When we come back, we'll take some of your calls. This is the one KSRM, now 9:17. Good morning. Well, good morning and welcome back to Sound Off. This is the one KSRM, now 9:20, 54 degrees outside here on KB Road. Jake Thompson alongside Forrest Dunbar, who's currently running for Congress for the state of Alaska. You have a little competition, what we'll just refer to as token competition in the primary. Of course, that's always famous last words.
Yeah. So did Eric Cantor, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then very likely will be the what we refer to as the blue team candidate against Congressman Don Young in the general. Bill W., good morning.
Good morning to you, Jake. Good morning, Forrest.
Good morning.
Are you running? You're running on the Democratic ticket, or?
Yes, I will be. I will be the Democratic nominee in November.
Congratulations. The earth tremors every time Don Young's name is mentioned. He was my wife's school teacher in Fort Yukon way back when.
Very nice.
He's been around a long time. He's almost an institution. But,
yep.
On to you. I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Everything is about smaller government or bigger government or the $17 trillion debt, the robber barons, the big corporations, or the benevolent corporations. It goes on and on.
Yep.
And it's a big, huge fight between the Republicans and Democrats. But the question I'm going to ask you is, what about who we are, humans, people? Our cities, our big cities are a mess. The infrastructure's fallen away. The people living there are rapidly learning how not to work there, and they really need to work. We need to get the country working and going, self-respect-wise and everything. So I want to get away from the usual yak on debts and what would you say? What's your idea?
Sure.
On what to do about people?
Sure.
I really appreciate you running. I'd like to hear about people.
Thank you, Bill.
All right. Thanks for the call, Bill.
I appreciate that. Well, I like what he started out by saying, the Democrats and the Republicans, people are always talking about this party, that party. My first job in politics was working for a Republican, Frank Murkowski, and then I worked for a Democrat. And while I've been here in Alaska, I've worked for and with Democrats and Republicans. And I think it's really important that we try to put those sort of party identities away and realize there can be good ideas from either side of the party. And I really pride myself on that ability to work in a bipartisan fashion. And I think we've seen with our two senators that they also have accumulated influence in D.C. by sort of taking a similar approach. Famously, Lisa and Mark voted together 80% of the time, although she disputes that a little bit. But at any rate, it's very close. And when you're in D.C., it's kind of like how we used to approach foreign relations. That politics stopped at the water's edge. And I think when you're in D.C., a lot of things are just pro-Alaska. They're not necessarily Democrat or Republican. So many of us, the vast majority of people, want to see that road to King Cove, for example, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. Most of us want to see us develop our resources, whether you're Democrat or Republican. Now, what Bill said about people and about getting people back to work, I think that's absolutely correct. The single largest problem in America today, and also in Alaska, is finding where the good middle-class jobs of the future are going to come from. Because we've seen that the middle class in Alaska has been hollowed out, and a lot of those jobs have gone away, and they haven't been replaced by equally appropriate jobs. And so we have a huge problem with unemployment, but also underemployment in this country. Now, in my generation in particular, you'll come out with a college degree, and you'll end up bagging groceries. There just aren't sort of the jobs available, and we need to be more focused on that. And the debt is a huge problem. There's no question. He talked about that. But really, jobs are a larger problem, and in the short to medium term especially. And the debt has actually fallen. Not the debt totally, but the deficit at least has fallen pretty precipitously in the last few years. And yet this persistent unemployment has continued. And here in Alaska, we've got to be thinking specifically about how we diversify our economy. Because whether you are yes on one, no on one, whatever you feel about the oil industry, the truth is we all know that there might be enough oil and gas jobs for my generation. But for my kids and my grandkids, we've got to find other sources of jobs too, sources that are sustainable, things like sustainable fisheries, things like expanding our tourism opportunities, things like alternative energy development, and not just for like the environmentalist reasons. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating jobs and also lowering the cost of energy for Alaskans. And I think, but the last thing I'll say on that is I think he's absolutely right that a lot of the social problems we see, and I've done some work with poverty and that kind of thing in Anchorage, a lot of it comes back to someone doesn't have a job that they feel has a future, or they don't have a job at all. And when you put people to work, it cures a lot of the problems in their lives, especially if it's a job where they can make enough money that they can take care of their family, and it gives them that kind of self-worth, because that's who we are as Alaskans. That's who we are as Americans. We're a hardworking people, and our identities revolve around our jobs in a lot of cases.
And up next, we'll take a quick question here from Al.
Yes.
Al, go ahead.
Okay, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Are you a social democrat or are you a progressive?
I'm not sure.
All this construction are all temporary jobs.
Uh-huh.
You can build railroad. You can build. They won't do that anymore. The highways. You can build government office buildings. You can build local buildings, and you got the same thing. Their jobs are only temporary, and so. But the minings, if they let it do the mining, them jobs will last for 50, 60 years. And so you see how we are, and we had a monitor on there, right there, that made the statement one time. The mayor of the Kenai Peninsula Borough is like a CEO of a corporation. Is that right?
I think they have a little bit less direct influence than a CEO would, but I think you're right.
Same thing about the governor.
Absolutely. Yeah. I absolutely think that's right. That developing jobs and developing infrastructure in our state is absolutely.
So when they talk against the corporations, they're actually talking that they want big corporations to be the state of Alaska.
Well, I'm not sure I'm following exactly what you're saying here, but I will say that in terms of investing in infrastructure to develop jobs and hope to get more jobs in the state, I'm obviously very supportive of this. I will say one thing on the mining. So I'm opposed to the Pebble mine, and I'll tell you why. So you said, mining jobs are for 50 years, and that is the case in some mines, although sometimes remediation will take 100 years. But the fish in Bristol Bay, I was a commercial fisherman in Cordova, and to me, the fish are our most precious and sustainable resource, and the jobs in fishing should last forever if we develop them appropriately. So there are good mining projects. There are some mining projects I support, but Pebble is not one of them. I think Pebble is the wrong, like Ted Stevens said, it's the wrong mine in the wrong place.
So you're an anti-Pebble person.
I am.
But you don't drive a Subaru.
Well, I want to drive an American car. It's very important to me, actually.
Yeah.
And I guess he's looking at my car. It's a Ford Escape. I guess it's kind of like an American Subaru. That's about as close as you can get.
Sort of close. I did notice. First thing was the Raiders sticker.
Yeah, well, it's I said my parents came up in the late 70s. They actually came from California, and it's been a tough decade for the Raiders, but you gotta stick with your team through thick and thin, And I believe that hopefully we can turn around. I will say if they move out of Oakland, I'm done with the team. I'll have to find a different team. Yeah.
So
probably Seattle.
Raiders fan.
Yeah.
Running for Congress against Don Young. Bit of a dreamer.
Yeah. A little bit. But hey, we've got 3 rings, the Raiders do. It's been a little while. But we've got a proud history.
George, good morning.
Hey, good morning there, Jake. Good morning, Forrest.
Good morning.
You know what they say, Forrest? Life is like a box of chocolates.
Oh,
That's right.
I bet you've gotten that one a few times.
Totally fine.
Hang in there, and we'll be all right.
We had a box of chocolates fundraiser not too long ago.
There you go.
We're gonna embrace it. Yeah.
Well, I applaud you for running, and there's more undeclared voters in this state.
That's
so
right.
You vote for Democrats and Republicans, and that's how you solve things.
That's right.
Working it together and solving issues.
That's excellent. Yeah, absolutely. There are vastly more independents and undeclared in Alaska than both parties put together.
Well, first of all, I'd like to applaud you for mentioning that word fisheries.
Yeah.
The people up here, the representatives up here, seems like they don't even know how to spell the word fish, let alone fisheries. They don't address that issue at all. So thank you for mentioning it. And about Mr. Young, he's always in the...
We got a few seconds, George.
Topmost corrupt. Maybe you can hold me over real quick, Jake.
Yeah, that might be the way to go about it. Just hang on to that thought real quick, George.
Okay.
Our number is 283-5811. We're having a conversation with Forrest Dunbar, candidate for United States House of Representatives, searching to be our lone congressman. And this is the 1 KSRM. It's 9:30, time for news from ABC. Good morning and welcome back to Sound Off. This is the 1 KSRM, now 9:35, 57 degrees outside. We're here with Forrest Dunbar, running for United States House of Representative, Alaska's sole seat.
Spooky.
Yeah, a little bit. You know the song. Look at that. He's a regular little iPhone application. We had George on the line a second ago. George, you had a question.
Yeah, real quick. I just commenting on her. Don Young is in the top most corrupt congressman, and he's only there half the time. He votes only half the time, and he's known to be arrogant and without any powers. We don't have any representation. So Alaska needs representation. And who is elected isn't a reflection on Alaska. So I hope you do good here. You sound like you're interested in Alaska and what you're doing, and I really appreciate you bringing up the fishery issue. And run, Forrest, run.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And so Don does have one of the worst attendance records in the House, And although around election times, it always kind of goes up a little bit for some reason, but he's always in the top 10 or 15% of absences. And his excuse is always, well, it takes me a long time to travel back and forth from Alaska, but the representative from Hawaii has better attendance. And when I was working for Guam, we had much better attendance, although we couldn't vote on the House floor. But it's not really a legitimate excuse, to be honest. And I intend to travel back and forth, and right now they scheduled the vote, so everybody's basically done by Thursday afternoon, so you can make it back to your district and then make it back to D.C. And look, I mean, we have 2 other senators that have much better attendance records, so it is an issue, and it is an issue that we only have the one congressperson, so we want somebody in there that is energetic and someone that is that shows up. And frankly, I plan to live in my office. I'm a little bit of a workaholic, so that's what I intend to do. Again, that all being said, I just want to stress that I'm not trying to put down what Don Young did in the past. There were times when he was effective for the state, but we just have to acknowledge that that's no longer the case, and it's time to turn the page and move forward.
So basically, to go back to football, is you're saying this might be a Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers situation.
Well, I don't know if I want to compare him. Aaron Rodgers is the best quarterback one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. So we'll see if I ever reach that. But no, I mean, maybe I don't know. It's kind of hard to say that he's like Brett Favre from the Vikings. That's a little bit harsh. I don't want to put that on him. But yeah.
But now, with that, we were talking a little bit, and you had mentioned you would live in your office. And one of my criticisms that I often have from people that have just stay in the political world, at least on the national level, and I guess you see it on the state level a bit as well, is you start to live in a bubble after a while. Yeah. Like for a while, all of your friends, coworkers, everything is Washington, D.C.
Yep. Absolutely.
And here all the way across and skip a country is Alaska.
Yep.
And I find a lot of it happens to our representatives, of course. It happens all over the United States that people just lose touch.
Yep.
Now, what would you do to kind of to maintain your ties with the people of Alaska and to be able to represent them properly?
Absolutely. So one of Don Young's most legitimate defenses against his most recent round of ethics violations was, I didn't know this was unethical because these are my best friends. Like these lobbyists are giving me illicit gifts. I thought they were just my friends giving me gifts, and it was kind of a funny but true. He's actually telling the truth there. He's not lying. His C.J. Zane, for example, who's a big time lobbyist that was his name showed up in the ethics violations. He was at Don Young's fundraiser last week, and actually, ironically, I was down here in Kenai with John Cox at a Kenai Soldotna Chamber of Commerce debate. That same day, Don Young had a fundraiser in Anchorage. I mean, he was around. He just didn't come down. He had a fundraiser in Anchorage. C.J. Zane was there, same lobbyist that was in those ethics violations. So clearly, he's hanging around with the same group of people in this bubble, like you said. And so part of it is just he's been there for 40 years. I mean, of course this is going to happen. And part of it is the system we have in D.C. right now, where you are with lobbyists so often. They're the ones who can buy access into your office space. So you say, how would I avoid doing that? Well, first and foremost, I don't want to be there for 40 years. And I've said this before. If I'm there for more than 20 years, I give permission to any Alaskans to come into my office and hit me in the face with a baseball bat. I have no intention of staying that long. And frankly, you don't have to stay that long to become influential. The new House Majority Leader from California, McCarthy, this is his 4th term. He's been there between 6 and 8 years. I forget specifically. But the point is, you don't have to be there for 40 years to become influential. And another thing I think we need to change, and I've written about this and I've talked about this, I actually support term limits in Washington, D.C., and I'm one of the few people on my aisle that does.
I was going to say, can you be a Democrat and support term limits?
Well, I do, and the reason I think we need to take another look at it is we've always seen it as kind of a populist thing where we want to throw the devils out, all that kind of stuff. But we need to start thinking about it seriously as a form of campaign finance reform. And the reason is the current system we have in D.C. relies on staffers being hired by K Street firms. K Street is short for all the lobbying firms. And that staffer can promise, well, my guy that I used to work for, or gal, is going to be in Congress for the foreseeable future. They're going to be on committees. We know that the re-election rate is very, very high. So they can point to that, and that gives them tremendous value and tremendous salaries at these K Street firms. Now, if we had term limits, and I don't think we should just impose them immediately. We'll give a grace period for people that are already over the limit. But then that staffer couldn't make that same promise. And also, when that congressperson left their job, when they leave their jobs now, it's like LeBron James hitting free agency because they haven't happens so seldom. They get these huge salaries. But if we sort of clogged that revolving door with a flood of bodies, and we had a bunch of staffers and Congress people that were term limited out, then each of their individual values to the lobbying firms would be lessened, and the appeal of the salaries and the appeal of the profession, the lobbying profession, would also be less, and that would help us break that current connection between Capitol Hill and K Street.
Excellent. We're going to take a tiny break. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about the lobby. We'll talk about some of the issues that the country is facing, some of the hot button issues, and we'll see your stance on that. This is the one KSRM now, 9:42. Good morning. Good morning and welcome back to Sound Off. This is the one KSRM, now 9:45, 53 degrees outside here on KB Road. We're with Forrest Dunbar, running for United States Congress, the House of Reps. Only one seat for the great state of Alaska.
It's the one.
It is the
KSRM.
one. I know. Hey, you already got it down. And we're going to take one more question here. Ed, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for running, sir.
Thank you.
I feel Mr. Young should have been put in jail for what 08, but that's my personal opinion. The state should have fired him. My question to you is, yesterday, Mr. Cox was on.
Yes.
He made some statements. First one, get rid of the IRS. Second one, get rid of the EPA or DEC, basically who would control the permits for mines and things, I believe.
Uh-huh.
And he said something to the effect of impeach the president.
Yep.
Now, maybe I misunderstood, but I feel I wouldn't vote for that man if he was the only one running. How is do you agree with them opinions of his?
I think he was talking about John Cox. I didn't listen to that interview, unfortunately, so I can't say specifically what he said. But assuming he said, and I've heard him say this in debate, so he said, get rid of the IRS, get rid of the EPA, and impeach Obama. It's kind of funny. I see that as fundamentally unconservative, if that makes sense. Conservatism, to me, a lot of it means we don't move too quickly in any direction. So we'll have change, even large change, but we're not going to sort of blow up the whole system. So I think there's a lot of reforms that need to be made to the IRS, to the EPA, and particularly the way the EPA applies certain regulations in Alaska is mistaken. And I've actually worked on litigation against that in the past, the way that they're applying the Clean Water Act and that kind of thing, because they're applying it differently in Alaska than they are in other parts of the country. But that being said, this whole-scale repeal, that's something that doesn't appeal to me, and I think the majority of Alaskans would say the same thing. The impeachment stuff, that's a red herring. That's not. Frankly, it's a waste of time and money. We shouldn't have that kind of stuff. This lawsuit is also a waste of time and money. And look, I disagree with the president on a lot of things. But the idea that we're going to have this kind of dog and pony show, it's a distraction. And right now, Congress can't even get basic reforms passed, There are things we need to do to address the border crisis. There are things we need to do to help the VA. And they to their credit, it looks like they probably are going to go forward with something for the VA, which is very important to me. But a lot of the basic things, we're seeing that they fall apart. I mean, we saw this government shutdown that happened last year.
Yeah.
So I was on my way to training. We had suspended my campaign. I was going on active duty. And I had a plane ticket in my hand. And I got a call from my superior officer that said, you cannot get on that plane. They're shutting down the government. We've got to delay our training. And so people said it wasn't going to impact the military. That was nonsense. It absolutely impacted the military. And this comes from this sort of absolutist view. It comes from the same place as this impeachment talk. This thing that, Obama, whoever it is this some kind of evil enemy that we have to use all these really extreme tools to attack. And that really isn't my style, and I think it says something that there was briefly impeachment talk about George W. Bush when the Democrats retook the House in 2006, and that was squashed, frankly, and I'm glad it was squashed. I'm glad that the moderates in our party and moderate Republicans came together and said, look, George W. Bush did some terrible things, and he wasn't a very good president, but impeachment is a very specific and very extreme option, and it's not one that I support.
And with that, let's let's talk about some of the bigger issues. I think the number one thing, possibly, well, it's tough. So many issues get tossed around now. But Obamacare, go.
The Affordable Care Act.
When it was working for him, he called it Obamacare. So.
Yeah, well, I call it the Affordable Care Act, and you can imagine why. It polls much higher when you call it the Affordable Care Act, which is kind of funny. Yeah. But I'll tell you, I'll talk about a personal story. So when I got out of law school, I lost my student insurance, and I happened to be one of the people. A lot of people in our generation don't get insurance from their employer, either immediately or in general. And so I didn't have employer insurance, and I didn't have my school insurance. And so I went out into the private market looking for insurance, and I got rejected by every single company in Alaska that provided private insurance. And the reason is because I have a pre-existing condition attached to a sports injury I had. And so I called the hotline, and they said, look, you are uninsurable. For the next 5 years, you are uninsurable. And it was this incredible stress. I was 27. I thought myself pretty healthy, non-smoker, pretty good shape, but I couldn't get health insurance. And so I eventually got the state-sponsored this high-risk pool called a CHIA, $250 a month or $240 a month, $10,000 deductible, no preventative care, just not good insurance, not what I wanted. Now, today I get my health care through the military. I'm on a form of that. But if I didn't have that option, I would probably be in one of the exchanges. I would have to. So whatever kind of reform we have. So I think we need to absolutely reform Obamacare. I call it Obamacare. There it goes. The Affordable Care Act. But this idea that we should repeal it and replace it with nothing, that is something I reject because it leads to insurance companies discriminating against people with pre-existing conditions. And, there are a lot of stories that are a heck of a lot worse than mine, people who are recovering from cancer and things like that are uninsurable. I just had that sort of life experience where I went out into the world and I realized, wow, I did not realize it was so prevalent where people with pre-existing conditions are discriminated against by insurance companies. So whatever reform we have has to keep that heart of the act intact.
But on the same token, aren't you telling a private company that they have to?
Well, it's an interesting
now
thing.
Government meddling into private enterprise.
Well, it's do we want the full? There are places where we don't let the free market sort of operate, 100%. Things like having auto insurance when you're driving. I mean, that's something that we're telling people that they have to purchase that. And there are other places where NSTAR. I mean, we have utilities, public utilities that are tightly regulated, and the reason is because we've decided that things like water and power and gas, those aren't things we want to be able to have basically price gouging or price discrimination, or a private company being able to say, we're going to sell you power at one price, we're going to sell power to this other person we don't like at a different price. We regulate those kind of things, And I think healthcare is one of those things where I do think it's a right, not a privilege. And we'll have a healthier, more productive society in the long run if we treat it that way. And employers will lose less employee hours, for example. We'll be able to keep this thing humming along a little bit better. But I don't want the case where someone gets cancer through no fault of their own. I mean, you could have a child who gets leukemia. And what is that person going to do? Are they going to sell their house, sell their car, do everything they can? Or do we want a system where there aren't caps on the amount of health insurance that person can, payouts that person can receive, or that child can receive? A society where we actually do take care of each other sometimes. I think that's last point on this. I'm a member of the Jewish faith, and we have sort of this kind of ideal, and I think that Christians do as well. At the end of the day, we take care of each other sometimes.
All right, and jumping from that, we'll go to the Middle East.
Okay. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good segue, right? What specifically would you like to know about the Middle East? It's a little bit of a mess.
Okay, you get elected.
Yeah.
You're in Congress.
Sure.
What's your voice on it going to be?
Well, first and foremost, I think a lot of Congress people, especially when you're from sort of these more far-flung areas in the United States. And again, I worked for the congresswoman from Guam and for the senator from Alaska, and we, one of the senators, our role is a little bit different than some of the Congress people that are in California, New York, Pennsylvania, the big population centers, where they can think a little bit more about national issues, where we are a little bit more focused on Alaska-specific issues, about getting Alaskan infrastructure and that kind of thing. So I think that would be, first and foremost, what I'd be aiming to do. But there still will be times when, yes, things like the Middle East will come up and I'll be asked to vote. I've been to the Middle East a number of times. I've been to Israel twice. I've been to Egypt and Jordan. I worked with a thing called the Iraqi Refugee Assistance Project when I was in law school that helped Iraqis who had been translators for the U.S. military and were now being targeted by extremists, help them navigate the immigration system so that they could come to the United States and be safe.
I remember when that was hitting the news.
Absolutely. Well, it's still happening now, but now it's, there's some complications. But so I was actually working on the policy and not the legal end. So I would get in a van with my friends in Connecticut, and we'd go down to Congress, and we'd go talk to senators and talk to House representatives, and we asked them, what can we do to make this system simpler so we can protect the people who served alongside our soldiers and Marines and airmen. In general, my view, though, is that we should try to be engaged a little bit less. That I think the American people have realized that there's a lot of things we can't solve over there, and we have to kind of let them work it out for themselves. So, for example, I don't want to see us send large-scale ground troops back into Iraq. I think that's the wrong thing. There needs to be a political solution there. Now, what we're doing in saving these Yazidis, I do support that. I mean, these are a group of people that were going to be massacred, and we had the ability to help them. And we have the ability to help the Kurds turn the tide against ISIS through, or I guess they're called the Islamic State now, but turn the tide against this group through targeted airstrikes. Those are the kind of interventions I support. And then I also am a very strong supporter of Israel. Like I said, I've been there I've been there twice, and it's an issue that does matter to me. But again, I think we should try to be when we're engaged, we should always try to realize that we don't have some magic wand that we can just wave and change things. At the end of the day, a lot of these issues has to be worked out by people in the Middle East on their own.
All right, and with that, we'll take our last little break, and when we come back, we'll give you a couple minutes to wrap up. This is the one KSRM, now 9:55. We're speaking with Forrest Dunbar, candidate for United States House of Representatives.
Paid for by friends of Forrest Dunbar. Hello, my name is Forrest Dunbar. I'm a lifelong Alaskan and a candidate for the United States Congress. Today I'd like to talk to you about an issue that's very important to me.
This is one of the things that I think you've done probably better than any other candidate.
Sounds like music.
We
released this on April Fool's Day.
Is your YouTube and online campaigning shows you got a bit of a sense of humor. You're having fun with the election.
Oh, we're trying.
So anyway, wonderful looking band, by the way.
Yeah. Let me just say that was David Velasquez was singing there. His band is called Aeromoto. They opened for what was the most recent band that came to the Moose's Tooth? MGMT. So he's a very talented musician. We're very happy that he did that for us.
That is excellent. But this is you've embraced social media.
Yeah.
I don't know how well it's going to work out for you, but
well, it helps us reach out to a younger segment of the population, and it helps us reach out actually to the rural communities. It's surprising the level of penetration that Facebook has in the Alaska Native community and the rural communities out in the bush. So that's been very helpful for us. We also do some traditional media, but we don't have quite the piles of lobbyist cash that Don Young does. So we probably won't be up on TV the way that he is now.
And so if someone wanted to donate piles of cash to you, how would they get in touch with you?
Well, we take individual contributions, and so the pile is a little bit limited in its size. But ForrestForAlaska.com, our website, Forrest with 2 R's, ForrestForAlaska.com, or they can call 854-4819, and we could send them Contribulope. But we're very proud that our last reporting quarter, 90% of our donations came from individual Alaskans, and that was 306 different contributors here in Alaska. Don Young had 33. They represented 20% of his total take. 80% of it came from outside, came from lobbyists or from PACs. A lot of that came from Virginia, from New York, from Texas, from Florida. And we're very proud that we are a much more grassroots campaign.
And, okay, we've got about 30 seconds here.
Sure.
Final words?
Absolutely. I just want to say thank you so much for having me here. Thank you for having me on the Kenai. I've loved coming down and dip netting when I lived in Anchorage. I'm from Cordova. I'm from Eagle. I'm from a different part of the state. But as I've traveled the state in this campaign, I've realized that we are Alaskans. We can come together. We're not Democrats or Republicans. Most of us are independents or undeclared. And what we want and what we need is effective, ethical representation in Washington, D.C., and that's something that I can provide.
Forrest Dunbar running for United States House of Representatives. This is the one KSRM, Soldotna Kenai Homer.